Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another episode of The Owner's Box After Dark. I'm your host, Mark Farinella, the former assistant sports editor, Patriots beat writer, sports columnist, and you name it, at a major metropolitan newspaper down here in southeastern Massachusetts, which I'll be talking about a little bit later in the podcast, so stay tuned for that. Don't worry, it's not anger and bitterness. It is March 30th, 2021, and by the time I get through with this, it'll probably be March 31st. And wow, I think that probably marks about 54 weeks into the pandemic, and there's not much more I can say about that I haven't said over the previous 54 weeks. So it's we just keep on keeping on, as they say, and hoping for the best. I noticed that football games everywhere are being postponed. Of course, high school football being played in Massachusetts at this time of year because of the pandemic, and in spite of everybody's best efforts to get at least 5 or 6 games in, the coronavirus refuses to back down and is wreaking havoc with the schedules again. So let's hope we can get a few more in. I know I'm not scheduled to do another football game for North TV until the 23rd of April, although there are 2 open dates for the King Philip Regional Warriors in between that, and there's a good chance that they will fill at least one of those with a home game. At least I'm really hoping they will. Interesting tonight, as we record this here in the palatial surroundings of Fulton Pond Studios in Mansfield, Massachusetts, Studio A. I just got through watching Hoosiers, that really great old movie, made in 1986, I think it was, 86 or 87, somewhere around there. And no matter how many times I see that movie, I continue to be on the edge of the seat, watching the Hickory Huskers battling their way through the Indiana State High School tournament. It really was a great movie. It still brings chills to me. And I don't think anybody really intended it to be like that at the beginning. And in fact, it's really hard to believe. If you read some of the stories about the filming of that movie, Gene Hackman, who played the lead character, the coach, Norman Dale, who had come from a mysterious past to this little tiny town in Indiana to build a basketball team and to rebuild his career and his life. It's hard to believe that Gene Hackman spent most of the time on the set absolutely making a living hell out of the life of director David Anspaugh, which is his first feature film, by the way. He was claiming to everybody that the movie would be a flop, and he didn't want to be in it, and he was hoping he would forget his participation in it by the time he landed in Los Angeles after filming was over. Well, it became, of course, one of the most iconic sports movies ever. It really just touched a responsive chord in the hearts of Americans, because it, for one thing, it looked back at a time that was seen as simpler and less complicated, the early 50s in rural Indiana, where basketball was king. And it was that typical David versus Goliath storyline of the little team that could, a team that nobody gave a chance to do anything. The coach was almost fired. The best player didn't want to play. And then all of a sudden everything turned around, and the town drunk who became an assistant coach briefly managed to get his life turned around, but not for long. Then, of course, who would have expected him to do so? And yet they do go, and they beat the Tough City team in the state finals, and everybody's happy at the end. And, it was something about the entire way it was done. A period piece that was done with respect for the period. Now, I know there are some folks these days who claim, oh, it's a racist movie. Yeah, because it was a bunch of white kids beating a bunch of black kids at the end of the movie. You know, there is a certain truth to history, and indeed that part of Americana, while maybe not reflective of what today's Americana was, it existed. And if you're going to tell a story accurately, you would probably have to make note that a team from East Backwash, Indiana, would have to face a team from a town like South Bend, you know, with an entirely different demographic makeup. And if indeed they won, as the Milan High School team did win back in, was it 1951, I think it was, then, you know, that happened. That happened. And nobody's making any judgments today, or shouldn't be making any judgments today about it. You know, that movie probably should have gotten more awards than it did. In fact, Dennis Hopper was nominated for an Oscar for his role of Shooter, the town drunk who, you know, had incredible innate basketball knowledge and helped Norman Dale get through some of the rough humps of adapting to Indiana high school basketball before he went back on, you know, on the booze and all that. But just think of the iconic scenes, the things you remember about that movie. The best scene of them all, as far as I'm concerned, if you think about it, is going back to when the Huskers first walk into Hinkle Fieldhouse at Butler University. And they are, of course, they are awed by a real basketball arena. You know, the stands go up forever. The windows in the background that look down and shine a godlike light onto the court. And that's what I really love about Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis, because they recaptured that look in the end zone, to have those giant windows that look out over Indianapolis, whatever skyline that might be. But it just has that look of the Butler Fieldhouse completely on steroids. And to have Gene Hackman pull out a tape measure, and he has one kid measure from under the basket to the foul line. How far is that? 15 feet. Okay. And he has the evangelical kid put the shortest kid on his shoulders and hands him the tape. He says, measure from the rim down to the floor. So they measure down. How much is that? 10 feet. 10 feet. And Gene Hackman says, I think you'll find those are the exact same dimensions as in our gym back in Hickory, or something to that effect. And that was the point, that basketball was still going to be played on the same court that they played at home. That was so great. You know, it's also amazing to remember that most of the kids that played the Huskers were not professional actors. I think only one of them was. For the most part, those 7 or 8 guys were either former, or even in a couple of cases current at the time, Indiana high school basketball players who auditioned, proved that they could play basketball, and then showed that they could handle a few lines here and there. How authentic was it in many ways? I still think, though, the baskets in the scenes at the end there, in the state tournament game played in Butler's Fieldhouse, I think those had to have been lowered to about 8 feet, or maybe even more, because they just don't look right as you're looking at the camera and the angles of it. I think they're shorter because they had to make sure that these kids didn't miss layups and things like that. But you know, I'll probably find out that wasn't the case. But still, it's a terrific movie. It brings back great memories of basketball, and probably why basketball does have a special place in the heart of America, especially at this time of year while March Madness is going on. And to be honest, I know many, many young athletes from around here who would pop in a DVD, or even a little earlier, a VHS tape of Hoosiers, and watch it the night before a huge game to put themselves in the proper frame of mind to play in that game. And with all that in mind, I just wanted to share with you some good news I got this week about one of my closest friends. And I am very happy to report this, as I did on my website, which is www.theownersbox2020.com, that my good friend Missy Traversi, you know her. She's been on the Owner's Box and the Owner's Box After Dark 3 times now, and soon to be 4th, promise you. She accepted the head coaching job for women's basketball at Army, at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a good job. That is a very good job, especially for an up-and-coming young coach who has proven herself a winner at all of her previous stops, and now has a chance to learn some more and gain some experience coaching in a place that's not going to be easy, because recruiting is probably going to be the toughest thing. But I think Missy's going to fit in perfectly there, because I think she is a born leader. I think that's the only thing I can say. I got the call from her, I would say about, I want to say 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Actually, it was a text message while I was driving back from a quick trip to the Cape. And she said, can I call you? And be in about an hour. And I said, sure. I get home and the phone call comes. And I had already figured out that it had to be her getting a new job. Now, her career has been on an upswing since it started. I mean, even you look at her as a player, 3-sport standout at Bishop Feion High School in Attleboro. Played Division I basketball at the University of Maine, got them into the NCAA tournament. Played professionally for 2 years in a 3-year span, and in the middle year between that, she actually coached basketball here at Brookline High School. She had a tryout with the Chicago Sky of the WNBA. Went full-time into the coaching ranks after that. Coached in high school at Dover-Sherborne and at Attleboro. Was for 1 year an assistant coach with Kathy Delaney Smith up at Harvard. And then she took her first head coaching job in college with Wheelock College in Boston, a Division III school. After 2 years there, she got the job that she currently holds, or at least did until Sunday, at Adelphi University in Garden City, New York, a Division II school. 3 winning seasons out of the 4 she was there, 2 of them with 27 wins in them. Twice her team was the number 1 seed in the East Regionals in the NCAA Division II tournament. And the most recent one of those, coming in March of 2020, was regrettably interrupted by COVID-19. As you may recall, of course, all NCAA tournaments at all levels were immediately canceled once the pandemic became a panic in that second week of March. And then, of course, going up another year, she had her more recent team practicing every day, ready to go. Season was going to start late for the Panthers and for the rest of the Northeast 10 Conference. And then, just about a few days before they were going to start, early in January, I think it was. Actually, it was late in December of 2020 when they announced that the Northeast 10 would suspend the season altogether. So her span at Adelphi was 5 years, only 4 seasons of actual on-court coaching. And I actually talked to her about that in episode 30 of The Owner's Box, the audio podcast. And here's a little bit of what she had to say about having to endure the wait to find out if indeed she had a season that would be ahead of her coming up this year. And it was excruciating in a way, because she had a feeling something might go wrong. But her kids were out there practicing every day. They were eager. They wanted the chance to kind of redeemed themselves from having lost the opportunity to host the tournament in the previous season. And she just had a feeling that something bad was going to happen, and here's what she had to say about it. So here you are, back in the gym with your current team, which does have some significant personnel changes from last year's team, but it's a very different start to your season. I mean, last year at this time, your team had already played 10 games. Today, as I'm talking to you, the Adelphi website doesn't even have a schedule posted for your team. How disruptive is that in the planning for the immediate future?
Yeah, mentally it's more of a drain, I think, than anything, on all of us, on the players and the coaches. But I have an incredible administration that's working hard to try to get everything moving and trying to get us a schedule. But, there's a lot that's out of his hands as well. So we're just in a holding pattern. That's what we're in right now. And mentally it's a lot. It's very taxing. But we try, like I said, every day we try to look at what we do have and the good stuff. And even just being together and building each day, that's definitely not something that's given. So we're fortunate in that regard.
I would assume, though, that you have to be fairly confident that it will be a go. I mean, otherwise, I don't think you'd be able to start practice, to be honest.
Yeah, one would think, right? But Mark, I'm not surprised by anything anymore.
Oh, I know. After this past year, exactly.
Based on what we went through, and being less than 24 hours away from that Jefferson game, and then having it all shut down, to now being less than a month away, really, from playing, there's a good chance that it might shut down. And I want to stay positive and I want to be hopeful, but you just don't know. You just have to, like I said, one day at a time, one practice at a time, and try not to look too far ahead. But that's hard to do, especially for someone like myself, who's a planner, and we very much want to make sure our student athletes are ready for what's to come. And I got to credit them. I don't do it enough, and I'm really proud of the way that they have come together during these difficult times, and they haven't made excuses. They continually show up, and they work. Granted, motivation sometimes is an issue, but other than that, I mean, this crew, they mean business, and it's encouraging to be around their competitive spirit right now. Like, that's what gets me out of bed every day, is knowing that I have a group of young women that are staying ready and want to play. And I just think it's a really inspiring feeling right now with everything going on.
Even with the lost season and all that, I don't believe that Missy was going to actively seek out another job this year. I mean, she had 83, I think it was, wins at Adelphi over those 4 seasons that she coached. And she had a couple of her veteran players coming back and had opted to accept the offer from the NCAA to reuse that year of eligibility that they lost because of the pandemic. And so, with that in mind, she probably could have built a pretty good team in a short amount of time and then figured out what the future might hold then. But here's the interesting part. The head coach at Army was a fellow named Dave McGarity. And he had been there for 15 years, 16 years in all, 1 year as an assistant. And he had spent something like 47 years in coaching. So at 71 years of age, he was ready to retire, and I can't say I blame him. Once he had told the athletic administration at West Point that he was going to retire, they put together a committee of people who would be looking out there to see who was out there and who might be available or who might be interesting, and apparently Missy's name was at the top of that list. Now, granted, her school was, probably about 50 miles away, maybe a little bit more from West Point, so they had an idea who she was, and so they went to her and asked her if she'd be interested. Now, Division I is the level that you would like to be at. We've only had a few people around here get to the Division I level in coaching. Obviously, Mark Schmidt at St. Bonaventure, another Bishop Feehan alum. In fact, it's practically all Bishop Feehan alums, basically. He's had the job at St. Bonnie's for a while and got them into the NCAAs this year. Monique LeBlanc at Brown, who succeeded Foxborough's Sarah Bain as the Brown head coach. So he went from local to local there. And, so you've had some people have those coveted D1 jobs. And Missy wants that. That's part of the ladder. And while she was perfectly happy at Adelphi, and she also had the rank of assistant athletic director there, it was the old saying, it was an offer she couldn't refuse. So when she called me, she explained all that to me, and as quickly as she could, because she was driving from one place to another. She tends to be always in motion. And so the rest is now at least starting a new history. Personally, I think it's a great spot for her. Oh, yes, it's not easy to recruit an athlete to Army. Keep in mind that if you are going to even get an appointment to West Point, you have to have great academic credentials. You've got to be able to show that you are, a leader in the making, and you have to have some high, like representative or state representative or U.S. representative or somebody like that actually recommend you for the spot. So that's the first issue. The second issue is that this is Division I basketball, but there are several levels of Division I basketball, and let's face it, she's not going to get the next Paige Beckers. That kid at UConn is just absolutely incredible. And, let's face it, not too many other Division I schools get a player like that, too. There are the hierarchy, and then there's a lot of the rest, and Army is part of the rest. But they have been successful in the Patriot League. They played the likes of Holy Cross and BU. And I think that if you can get a decent athlete there who is willing to accept the 5-year commitment to the military after graduation, you're going to get an athlete who has a goal in mind. An athlete that's going to have strong credentials, strong personal credentials, who's going to be coachable, and who is going to be supremely focused and dedicated to self-improvement. Otherwise, you don't survive at West Point. You just don't. And the other thing that Missy told me on our brief phone conversation was that you don't have to think in terms of, oh my God, I'm in the Army, I'm going to go to Afghanistan or Iraq or something like that. First of all, of course, you graduate from West Point, you are a commissioned officer. And you are at a higher level than most. You are regarded as a leader by definition. And you also basically can choose from among so many potential areas of concentration that are offered by the United States Army in leadership positions, that not only will you be serving your country in important positions, but you're also going to be preparing yourself for your post-military life and that preparation is actually going to help you find leadership positions later in life. So it's actually a pretty good selling point if you can handle the discipline. And believe me, let me put that all in capital letters, discipline. Now, as I mentioned in a column I wrote for my webpage, which you see a picture of it right now, Missy understands that these athletes are going to have plenty of authority figures that they're going to have to deal with at West Point. West Point is practically unforgiving. And that's what they want. They want to make sure that if you are a graduate of West Point, you can handle the pressures. You can handle all of what life or war could throw at you. So she knows that she will have to be an authority figure too, and she is. But she's a different kind of authority figure in that it's just something part of her DNA. and I've seen this ever since day one. The first day I ever saw her play a basketball game at Bishop Feion, there is just such a joy in how she approaches the game, whether it was as a player or as a coach. She sees the game through a lens of I don't even know what the proper word is for it, but it's like, it's not childlike, because there's a lot of, she knows to meet responsibility. She has always been one that has been certainly a take charge but take responsibility type of person. But it's just such there's such joy in her game that it rubs off on everybody. It rubbed off on people in the MT Elite AAU program that she had. It has rubbed off on every single one of her stops in coaching. These kids want to play for her, and they know that there's going to be a lot demanded of them, but they see her coaching and sometimes even getting out there and still, throwing a few baskets in practice, and they see what's behind all that, and what comes out of her is something that makes basketball even more enjoyable than it is anyway. And let's face it, a lot of people can find a game to be drudgery if they're spending their whole lives trying to play it at a higher and higher level, to the point where it loses its fun sometimes. With Missy, it's never lost the fun. And I think with a lot of the people that have played for her, probably the vast majority of them, they have come away the same way. Disciplined, but fully enjoying the experience. And I think, let's say, I certainly haven't gone to West Point. I know two people who did. And I would have to think that if you are dealing with the daily pressures of the military environment and the high expectations they have for you in academics, and you're going to expect that you're going to get high expectations and a strict environment in your coaching too. But if you can actually derive a little bit of added joy out of it while you're dealing with everything else there, to me, I would think that would make it all the more enjoyable to be part of that basketball team, because it will almost be like a respite from everything else, knowing that you still have to face and live up to expectations that are really up there. It's going to take a special type of athlete to do what Missy's going to want them to do. And I think they'll get them. I think they'll get them. They may not get the best players in the country, and they're not going to get a lot of the top players in the country, because a lot of kids just aren't going to want to spend 5 years in the military afterwards. But I really think that she will find the right people for that program, and her organization, but her enthusiasm are going to mesh together and give them an opportunity to really enjoy their 4 years as members of the Black Knights of the Hudson. So I am very happy for Missy. I still think it's kind of funny. I talked to her a couple of times in the podcasts about whether I thought, people would come calling. She knew it. I mean, she was up for a couple of jobs already. I'm not telling any tales out of school, but this is the first time it got to that point. And she knew that as the success grew and as the numbers looked better and better, that at some point, people would come and look to see if maybe she'd be interested in taking that next step up. I know she felt a sense of responsibility to the folks at Adelphi. She really enjoyed coaching there. She enjoyed the people she worked with, and she definitely enjoyed the athletes. And as she said in episode 30 of The Owner's Box, she didn't really allow herself to think too much about the future, because there was too much to be accomplished in the here and now. And here's what she had to say about that. Before we leave, I do have a question that you may not be willing to answer, but it's up to you. We talked before about maybe what the future may hold. I mean, you've had two 27-win seasons at Adelphi. You certainly have established yourself in Garden City and environs as a dynamic force for good and for good basketball at Adelphi. But at some point, I got to believe that people are going to come calling, and I imagine you have to put that definitely as far back in your head as you have to. But does the thought come up much these days?
Nowadays, I would say this, and you always make me answer a tough question at the end, Mark. You're real.
Funny, you just cut out a little bit. I don't know what you called me, but it's okay.
Oh no, I said you're a stickler. You always ask me a tough question at the end.
All right.
I don't know. This pandemic has taught me that you really can't look too far ahead, and you have to really appreciate what you have, and not look at what you don't have. And that's kind of the approach I'm taking. Obviously, there's good days and bad days, but these women that I have here, they're helping me every day, helping me get stronger mentally and physically, and I hope I'm doing the same for them. And that's really the focus right now. But again, I don't. Of course, I aspire to be the best I can in my profession, and of course, I want to reach the pinnacle, whatever that looks like. But there's so many unknowns, and I just want to make sure that I'm taking care of myself, both on and off the court. Having balance and taking care of myself physically, and those are big priorities right now. And I think one day when that's all where I want it to be, the stars will align, and I'll be where I'm supposed to be. And right now, I'm firmly planted where I'm supposed to be.
My wishes, all the best to my friend Missy Traversi. And if you would like to read the column I wrote about her, please feel free. Again, I mentioned it before, www.theownersbox2020.com. You can't miss it. We'll be back after the messages with a few thoughts about some other recollections that popped up this past week.
受け取ってくれるよね。今度はキャラメルメルツ。
出たの？
新登場、甘く香ばしいキャラメルメルツ。期間限定です。
Hello again. Welcome back to the Owner's Box. After dark. Did I even mention which episode this is? I'm losing count. I think this is episode 43. If it's not, I'll have something underneath my face here that will say what an idiot I was for getting it wrong. But I'm pretty sure this was 43. I've got to write that down beforehand and have that in front of me. It's not as easy as it was when I was first starting this one. I said, I did 4 of those before, so I guess it's number 5. Huh? Anyway, yes, I am Mark Farinella. You know that. And the usual acknowledgments tonight. The mood candle is my Yankee Candle, Evergreen Mist, and I just put it out by picking it up. Well, it's been burning for a while, and it's all liquid in there. So, and I don't have, I only have matches, and I'm not going to stick my hand in there. So it smells great in here, and if it's not burning anymore, well, I'll save the candle for a little bit longer. Of course, the drink of choice, nothing special, just Diet Dr. Pepper. I've been drinking too much of it at night. I get up too many times during the night. And by the way, I had my last physical therapy session for my knee today. And I guess they figure that it's about as good as it's going to get. Now, I do have another appointment with my surgeon, Dr. Elizabeth Matzkin, on the 12th of April, and hopefully we'll get an idea of whether this thing is actually healed or what to expect down the road. And I'm going to have to ice it more. I've got to get it moving, though. That's the one thing that's very important. I have to move more than I have been. And, yeah, if there's going to be some discomfort, well, crap, I'm 67 years old. There are people who are in far worse shape than I am. And I'm just so happy I still have 2 legs that I can walk on, and that most everything else works pretty well right now. So I'm going to stop complaining about it, but I'll keep you all up to date on whatever. You know, I also have a new a recorder, I guess it is. It's really nice. It's one that's designed for recording podcasts, so I can hook up the really good microphones, my Sennheisers, which have been sitting in a bag. I can finally hook them up to this thing with the proper cords and everything. I can record multiple tracks at the same time. The sound quality is terrific, and especially it'll be good for the Owner's Box, the original podcasting, to do it on a remote location. So if once the pandemic moves along and I feel like I want to go out and talk to somebody, I can bring this along. I can either set up microphones on a table or I can use them as handhelds, and should be able to do some pretty good work on it. I had another one. I just didn't like it. I bought it. It was not terribly expensive. It had track controls and all that, but as it turns out, I just really did not ever fall in love with it. So this one is designed so much better, and it's by the people. It's called Zoom, no relation to the video conference call outfit, and it's pretty cool. And hopefully I'll get to use it, and at some point maybe I'll show it to you folks. Okay, another little unexpected, I would have to say it's a treat this week, because it's something I didn't expect at all. I did not expect it. My former newspaper, and I haven't been mentioning it much lately because I sometimes am a little pissed off at them, but my former newspaper is the Sun Chronicle in Attleboro, Massachusetts. That's where I spent the bulk of my career. I worked at a few other papers during my lifetime as well, but for the most part, that's where I made my name, I guess, if whatever name I have. They celebrated their 50th anniversary this week. Now, understand that the paper actually has a history that dates back far longer than that, but they were multiple newspapers. Now, in 1971, the year of my graduation from high school, the Attleboro Sun and the I gotta get this cord behind me. The Attleboro Sun and the North Attleboro Chronicle were two daily papers operating in the neighboring cities, and they were purchased by the United Communications Corporation. Well, first the Attleboro Sun was of Kenosha, Wisconsin, by the way, and then they UCC purchased the North Attleboro Chronicle, and despite the pleas of North Attleboro residents who wanted to maintain a separate newspaper, the two newspapers were finally merged into one and I think the first date of publication was March 1st, 1971. So this being the month of March in 2021, 50 years later, the current folks at the Sun Chronicle decided to put out a special section. And got some advertisements in it, which was good. But the primary advertiser was W.H. Riley and Son, the heating oil people around here, who served my house. I am very pleased with their service. Another thing I like about W.H. Riley and Son, this is a totally unsolicited advertisement, but they have always been loyal about advertising in special sections or on North TV, which does accept advertisements for its high school sports programming, always to support the local high school sports teams. W.H. Riley and Son has always been there for them, whether it's a small ad one day or a big ad another day. Commercials, even the commercials that I read during North Attleboro high school broadcast. During a King Philip Regional High School broadcast. I could probably remember it from just off the top of my head, but I don't really need to give them an advertisement here. They're there for the high school kids, and I really appreciate that. And the nice thing about that is that put a good idea in my head. So in 2014, before my mother passed, and she was having trouble here with the oil burner, ancient oil burner in this house. And so I said, look, let me handle it. We'll get something new. So I called W.H. Riley & Son, and I told them, look, I'm so-and-so of the Sun Chronicle, which I was at the time, and I've always appreciated the ads, and I figured I'd like to see what you folks can offer in terms of a new oil burner and a new central air conditioning unit, which we needed that as well. And so they came up with the offer. They showed me all the figures. They showed me the, especially the thing that made me happy was the how much more energy efficient the units were. And we had it installed here at the house. Of course, this is before I lived here, or before I lived here in my second tenure in this house. And my mother was pleased with it in her remaining years of life, and then I've taken over, of course, and I have tracked the energy expenditures and the costs, and yes, indeed, everything is as was promised, and their service has been right on top of things. Their oil deliveries are always on time, and the service has been great. So that has been my ad for W.H. Riley & Sons of North Attleboro and Taunton. Phone number you can always find on Google if you're interested. So anyway, in this special section that these, and I figured it couldn't be too large because unfortunately they just don't have the staff right now to devote to writing a large section. I know we've done commemorative sections in the past that were page after page after page after page. This one was pretty compact, but it had some good recollections and memories in it. And I was very surprised to see that the paper devoted a couple pages to the sports department, and not just listing off accomplishments and all that, but it was talking basically about the two guys that were the rocks of the sports department for so many years. And by that I'm talking about my dear friend Peter Gobus and myself. I was a little surprised they mentioned me because, not to get into long details here, but at the time of my layoff, I didn't raise a stink at the time because I didn't think there was any purpose. I mean, it was going to happen no matter what. But in the weeks and months that followed, I was a little ticked off by certain things I had heard about how I was being perceived inside the building and how the new owners didn't want to call attention to my departure because they were getting complaints that the paper had just lost one of its only readable individuals. So that was not in my words, theirs. In fact, I guess I heard a story about how one person had actually aired and allowed my byline from the Associated Press to go into print on one of the first Patriot stories I wrote after I was released as an employee, and that guy got a good talking to about how my name was not supposed to appear in the newspaper. So anyway, whether all that's true or not, I can't say because I'm not in the building, and I really don't spend much time talking to anybody except Peter because we worked together for close to a half a century. But in fact, most of the people I know in there, I don't really know all that well. One or two people I do know and I've worked with for a number of years, but time's passed and people are gone. But Mike Kirby, who was my boss for quite a while, was the I forgot what his actual title was. It would be equivalent to a managing editor, but I think they just called him the editor. He was in charge of the newsroom for many years, in my second tenure at the paper, anyway. And he wrote it because he accepted a buyout a few years ago, and so he has been working elsewhere. In fact, he works for W.H. Riley & Son. Another reason to give him a good plug. So Curb wrote most of this special section, and God bless them that they allowed him to do that because they have not given me a lick of work since. And to be honest, and I will be totally honest here, I do not want to go back into print journalism at this point. I've I've had my run in it. I had fun, but I'm doing other things that are much more fun and don't involve the long hours and sometimes the really inconvenient aspects of it. So, but Mike wrote a story, and I do recommend that you read it. I've had links up to it on Facebook and in Twitter, I guess. So, but he mentioned about the what it took to build the sports department. Now, one of the things he didn't mention, and there are a few things he didn't, I'll go into a couple of those, but one of the things he didn't mention was he was actually the first of our third men in, I guess you could call it. Peter came to the Sun Chronicle, I think, in 1972, and I joined the paper in 1977 after graduating from Northwestern and working briefly at the Taunton Daily Gazette and the Westfield Evening News, come to think of it. But Mike was the first of the additions beyond us, and he'd gotten out of. He was working briefly at the Pawtucket Times after graduating from Emerson College, and he spent a lot of times as a part-timer in sports before he was hired full-time. But once he was hired full-time by the paper, he was in news and eventually became the guy who ran the newsroom, and well-deservedly so. So, but yeah, he knew many of those stories of our origins, and he presented them well. And I was very pleased to read it, and I was completely surprised. I did not even know this was happening, and even if somebody had told me there was going to be a story about the 50th anniversary of the paper, I probably wouldn't have even thought my name was going to be in it. I do remember that they had a similar anniversary somewhere between 1987 and 1989. I don't remember exactly what the occasion was, but my name was never in that, despite the fact that I had spent 11 years building a sports department before leaving to go to the Patriot Ledger in Quincy. So I don't know if I would have expected my name to be in it, but it was a very well written, very, and I think it really kind of caught the dynamic of our sports department, of the things that we wanted to accomplish. Yes, we were heavily into some things other than high school sports. Peter always wanted to cover the Providence College Friars. I did the Patriots for so many years. We had different personalities. We were different people, but we had one goal, and that was to still make sure that we provided the best possible coverage we could of the local high schools, first and foremost. We didn't let anything get in the way of that. And Peter, I don't know how he's still doing it right now. He's getting close to his 70th birthday, and he looks younger than 70. I think the job kept us young as well as aged us at the same time sometimes. But it was fun to read, and I got a lot of great comments from people about it. And again, I had to tell them all. I was surprised. I didn't expect to see this. But my thanks to Mike and to the folks at the paper for remembering. Again, it's not a big deal, but it was not mentioned in the story that I did not leave of my own volition, although I was intending to leave not long after. My plan was to retire on March 17th, 2019, St. Patrick's Day. There's a significance to that. I will not get into it here. But the layoff came on August 29th, of 2018, if I'm correct. And so, it's not a big deal. The story said that I left the paper. A lot of us left the paper and didn't want to at that particular time, but we had nothing to do about it once the new owners came in. So, what can I say? Not something that I'm going to get into a snit over at this stage of the game. As I've said, I am having a blast in retirement. I never would have had the opportunity to do this play-by-play stuff that I'm doing, or to get into any of that, or to do the podcasting. I wouldn't have had time or the energy to do it. So, things are good in my life in that regard. So I'm just happy to have that opportunity. I'm happy to have had the 41 or so years that I had at the paper, and to the opportunity that I had, and the people I knew, and really enjoyed being around there. And that's one of the things I really do want to mention here, because I know they didn't have room to get into a lot of the personalities of the people who had worked there in the past. It would have been nice though to see some of them mentioned, and I know a few were here and there, and some of the people who wrote these articles were former Sun Chronicle people too. I mean, Rusty Darconti, the former publisher, and was the city editor when I first joined the paper. Ed Bristol, Western Norfolk County editor when I joined the paper, and the first editor I worked for. Larry Kessler, one of our copy editors, wrote an article. Many other people with an involvement, but I'm sad that some of the folks weren't mentioned, and I'll just mention a couple of them here with a couple of quick little memories, because I've always said that you could create a good situation comedy from the life of the folks in a small daily newspaper. I know it's probably been tried, but they tried it in large papers. Now, you look back at the old Lou Grant series, okay, when they turned Lou into a serious character after the Mary Tyler Moore show went off the air, but there was still that element. Here we are, the guy, he's an editor now of this major newspaper in Los Angeles, and yet there are only like 3 people that work for the paper. They're the only 3 people who are highlighted every week. And since then, ensemble TV would really work great for something like this. I mean, I think it's something like Parks and Recreation or The Office. Shows like that had great runs because they did have ensemble casts who could interact with each other, and you could see an episode about one guy one week and one woman the next week, and then maybe an inter-office romance or some sort of crisis or some funny thing. Oh my God, we had a million great stories at the Sun Chronicle over the years. I'll never forget, we'd hired somebody to work, not in sports, but this was a new hire for the newsroom at one point. And he was supposed to show up at a certain day. He went through the whole process, the interviews and everything like that. And then on the day that he was supposed to start work, he never showed up. No call, no contact whatsoever. The editors are sitting there all day waiting for this guy to show up. They had a desk for him at the end of the old newsroom, not too far from the sports department, in fact. And this guy was supposed to occupy the seat. And I always used to say, well, look, you know what happened? There was a great Star Trek episode one time where Captain Kirk went into an alternate dimension, and he kept fading in and out of existence in one dimension and the other. And sometimes you just see him floating through the air in a spacesuit and trying to get the attention of the people who would see them, thinking it was a ghost or an apparition of some sort. So I figured this guy was going to show up at some point floating in midair like, help me, but never did. I guess they finally found out that he just decided that he was going to look for another job because he didn't want to come to Attleboro. But you get something like that, you got to tell people. But tell me that wouldn't make a great episode in a situation comedy. Or even maybe a recurring story over a couple of weeks. There were some great people who worked at the paper. I'm going to mention a few of them right now. I think back to Henry Riley. We called him, he was the cop shop reporter, the police reporter. Certainly a character. You know, it's about 6'4", 6'5", skinny as a rail. I'd say he was a little bit on the conservative side, but that was back before conservatives were angry and disagreeable. I mean, he was just a little crusty even as a young man, but he was a funny guy and just a likable guy. And I miss guys like that. We played basketball at the Attleboro YMCA all the time, and Henry was the tallest guy we had. I used to always cover him because I could keep him away from the basket with my bulk. I would just lean back into him the whole time, and he always complained about how I wasn't letting him get to the basket. Well, that's the point of the game. But Henry was a great guy, though. I could tell you a great story right now, but I think I'll pass on it right now. It involves priests, and I don't think I should get into that here. Gloria LaBounty used to cover North Attleboro for a long time, then became our religion writer. Sweet woman, but with a really edgy sense of humor, and just the kind of right touch of cynicism that you really enjoyed. It made her a good friend to be around. And actually, her son Kevin worked for me in sports briefly. But Gloria she was a hot ticket, and I remember for a while she had to sit at the desk opposite me in the sports department because they didn't have enough desks for her. And so she'd sit there and she'd have to listen to me cry about my ex-girlfriends and so on and so forth all day. And she had a good heart, and I miss her. Gail Goddard Taylor. Gail was a general assignment reporter. She had actually worked in the bureau that we had in Franklin. We used to run a weekly newspaper there called the Franklin Sentinel back in the 70s and early 80s. And she was there all alone all the time, and I think that's the way she preferred it. I had a huge crush on her, I'll admit it, and she, of course, was offended by that, deservedly so. In today's newsroom environment, I would be fired for, well, I didn't do anything nasty, but you know what I'm saying. It's just not cool today, but we ended up becoming friends later down the road, and there was a lot of mutual respect there. Even in the worst of times, I think that she respected my writing, and I respected hers. But I always felt that she got pigeonholed a little bit by the paper. And again, it was the male society that wasn't willing to open the doors to some women at the time, and so she ended up leaving the paper and has worked as a freelance writer for quite a while. I think she's done some stuff for the Audubon Society. I also know she had a bad back. She was an equestrian for years, and was really into it, but I guess that took a toll on her back all those years. In fact, ran into her about, I want to say 8 to 10 years ago. She and her husband had come to a restaurant here in Mansfield just to have they were out shopping or something like that, and then they decided to stop at the Bertucci's. And I used to go in there a lot and eat at the bar because the bartender was cute. It's just the way I am. So one night, this couple comes walking over to me, and they sit down and they say, "Hi, hey, remember me?" The woman says, and I look at her. You know, she was white-haired all of us at the time, but then I said, "Oh my God, it's Gail," because I hadn't seen her in about 7 or 8 years to that point. She had just turned 60, so that would have made me about 57 at the time. And she and her husband Wayne sat and talked for quite some time about, how are you doing? What have you still at the paper? And it was a pleasant talk, and many nice things were said. And I felt so bad for Gail, though, because her back was killing her, and she had a lot of trouble walking, and she'd had surgeries and all that. So I remember helping. Wayne had to go out to the car and get the car and bring it close to the restaurant so she could get in. And so I helped her walk to the car, and it was kind of poignant. But I always have great memories. Even though we clashed a lot in our lifetime, I think just the fact that we knew there was a lot of respect there was nice to know. Another woman that I really thought was one of the greatest people I've ever worked with, Jo Reinertsen. Now it's J-O, and her last name now is Mitchell. Jo was straight from New York. She was a part-timer for us for a long time, and then she took over, when we hired her full-time, she took over the police reporting job. And, you want to talk about somebody who was absolutely adept at that. Now, Jo could act like one of the boys, but there was still a warm and sensitive woman there, too. Now, and we became friends. We're very, very friendly, and not very friendly. Come on, you know what I'm saying. But we really became buddies, and I'm so happy that we did. I mean, she was about 12 years older than I am. So I know she lives in northern Georgia now, and she's still okay. She's up there in years, but she has devoted herself to art, is a painter, and has found a nice little place to live, and with her husband, who worked in our circulation department for many years, and I'm so happy for her. Jim Hand, great guy, was our politics reporter for the longest time. Had a lot of respect, even though he working for us paper out in the sticks. The people in the State House knew who he was and respected him for his fairness and for his doggedness at chasing down stories. And such a great guy. He lost his wife at a young age. She had cancer, and he raised his daughters by himself, and just a terrific guy, a big heart. You knew it in him. It's just such a big heart and a good friend. And I was pissed off the day they laid him off too, because it can't be easy. His daughters are brilliant, also, and one of them played basketball for the Attleboro High basketball team. So I was happy I could get that in. Of course, Jim wasn't a very tall guy, and so neither was his daughter was not very tall. But she got into the games as a reserve guard, and she would always have some good minutes. And I'd find a legitimate way to mention it in the story if I could, because I figured if you can't help your friends, who can you help? Our photographers, Tom McGuire, who started on the same day at the paper as I did, February 7th, 1977. A classmate a couple of years ahead of me at Dominican Academy in Plainville. Keith Nordstrom, and his wife Sherry, who was for many years the person who corrected the ballots in my the Sun Chronicle Beat Fearless competition. The people would pick NFL teams to see if they could beat me every week in my picks. Marty Gavin, who I recently worked with at North TV. He was doing some sports camera work, but now I think they have him doing municipal meetings and stuff like that. Those guys put a lot of effort in, and a lot of time into it. Of course, Mark Stockwell, who's still there now, is getting all of it piled onto him, and I do not envy him at all for that. Some other names out of the past too, and I don't want to leave anybody out. I know I'm going to leave people out, but from the early days right there, Don McManus was a reporter. Rick Foster, a guy who, like me, went to the paper, left the paper, came back to the paper. I think we had a running competition about who was going to come back and leave the most times. The late Lee Carlson, friend of mine who lived on Bungie Lake, and I used to, he and his wife. We'd always be out there on the lake, and Laurel and in the sailboat, and Lee maybe in the powerboat, or the other way around, and I'd be out in my powerboat, and when we'd all hang out together, it was always a lot of great fun. Leo Peliquin, Mansfield guy, went on to become a lawyer, I believe. Lou Larini and Donna Hartman, you would have never known it, but they were having a hot and torrid newsroom affair. And there's some great stories to go along with that, but a real sweetheart, Allison Harris, former reporter at the paper from Georgia, and lives back down there now. She went to Brown University, if I'm not mistaken, and a real nice individual. Someone I miss a lot. Ted Nisi, a guy who was, you could see had talent right off the bat. Now he's one of the chief investigative reporters at Channel 12 in Providence, and he's on top of a lot of stuff. He's very good, and I'm glad he's moved on and done some great things in his life. And I know I'm leaving out a lot of people. I'm leaving out way too many people that I remember and love, and I just want to tell them all that sometimes I have a hard time leaving the paper behind because it left me behind, and I didn't have a chance to write the farewell column that a lot of longtime sports columnists do. It is kind of nice to know that people remember my work and have given me some props for it lately. But I'm carving out maybe a little bit of a new direction for myself, and I'm happy to do it. But I miss people, and I think that they should be remembered. And as I get a little older, and sometimes the memory gets a little foggier, I just want to make sure that I don't lose touch with so many of the really terrific people with whom I worked for so many years. Because I'll tell you one thing. I don't care what they say about the paper. And yeah, it's not the same paper now that it was 15, 20 years ago. Maybe even sooner than that. But we put out one hell of a daily newspaper. 7 days a week when we were doing it. We put out one very good local newspaper. And if you don't believe that, I could show you copies of our paper. And you could compare them against any paper similar sized and tell me that our content, our presentation, our writing ability, our reporting ability wasn't better. Of course, I worked there. What else am I going to tell you? I also think, still, we would have made one hell of a situation comedy. Maybe I'll write that someday. With that, I have gone to 33 minutes on this segment, so I know I'm going to be over time tonight. So I just wanted to remind you all, folks, all of you wonderful folks out there, use the hand sanitizer. I do. I try to keep the hands clean. Vaccinated, of course. I have not ever felt a single side effect from the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And even better, I have no snags in my hair, and I got no tears because I did get the shampoo. I got the vaccine from the people who made baby shampoo. So what the hell? Please, I see the numbers going up again, and some of these teams canceling their games and all that. And I'm like, come on, folks, wear the masks. Just do what has to be done. This is getting ridiculous, and I know that despite what the stock market is saying, and thank God it is saying that, this economy cannot survive much longer if we have to have another shutdown, another lockdown somewhere along the way. So please show some responsibility. Do what you can to keep this pandemic going in the disappearing direction. It wants to keep kicking back. And that's just foolishness on our part if we ignore the reasons that we know that will help prevent it and will help finally eradicate it. And so with that in mind, I will probably have another one of these out soon. Also, I will make note that Missy Traversi will join me for a podcast soon. It will be when she has a chance to kind of get her feet underneath her, though. I mean, she has to hit the ground running at Army already, I guess. And so I told her, look, take some time, get to know the lay of the land up there, what your responsibilities are, and when you have a half an hour somewhere along the way, the operation is always operative, is always able to operate here at Fulton Pond Studios. So we'll definitely get her on soon to talk about her new job, and I'll be very happy to have her on. So until then, until our next meeting, this is Red Shirt Mark. I notice it keeps changing color. It must be something about the light fixture above me. Wishing you all good health. Please stay safe, and good night, everybody.